In this video, we're going to go over plug and play. The plug and play process is quite simple. We're going to create a template, assign a template to a site, and then onboard a couple switches and just get them onto the network. So let's go ahead and start with our template. I'm going to go ahead in the main menu, go to my tools and my template editor. Important part of plug and play templates is that this is part of onboarding configuration, so we need to make sure that any templates that we create specifically for plug and play onboarding is done in the onboarding configuration project. I'm going to add a template in here and choose my template language, which is going to be Velocity for this one. And I'll give this a name. So this will be my PNP switch template. We can give this a description. Then I'm just going to choose the type of switches that I want to deploy this template to. So I'm choosing the 9300s. And then the software type, which is iOS XE, and we'll go ahead and add that. So a template is really meant to be, as for the purposes of onboarding, a template is meant to be the basic configuration I need to get this device onto the network. I use a series of iOS configuration commands with variables. So when you see here, I'm going to go ahead and create interface loopback 0, and then I'm going to call a variable for that IP address because that is a variable that might change from deployment to deployment. So same thing with something like hostname. I'll use a variable for hostname. Anything that is stagnant that's going to be the same from switch to switch, I'm not going to use a variable. So if my standard is VLAN 1204 is my fabric underlay, then I don't need to make that a variable because that's my standard. But anything that is off standard or changing, I want to go ahead and make into a variable. So I'm just going to go through this template and continue to add a bit of config, and anywhere where my data stagnates or is part of a standard stays. Anything that can vary becomes a variable. I'm going to go ahead and add in some ISIS configuration here because for this particular deployment, I'll be deploying SDA at some point, and then we will end that. So with these variables, if I want to further automate this or maybe utilize a Python script in the future to automate this, I'm going to want to go ahead and create a CSV file where I have my parameter set, and then I'm putting the values to my variables on a per switch basis. So this one will be switch 1, this will be switch 2, and if I had more switches, I would add them. So each variable, I'm applying a value in here. And then what I'm going to do up here is, as I gather my serial numbers, I'll put my serial numbers in here. So if I was to automate this with a Python script, as devices join the network, I could put some smarts in there to assign the serial numbers in here and to utilize this template. Now, if I'm not going to use a CSV file, then I can come into, after I save this, sorry. So we'll save this, and then I can come into my form viewer. So this is the form that will be displayed at the time of deployment. And I'm using that CSV file to populate this, but if I wanted to, an administrator could populate these fields at the time of deployment. So before we can use this, it must be saved and it also must be committed. If you do not commit, you can't use it. And if you make any changes to a template, those changes must be committed as well. So the next thing is, where do I want to use this template and how are we going to deploy this? So I'm going to come into my hierarchy through design network hierarchy and then to the network settings. And just showing you here the type of information that comes in. And this is why during that configuration, you would not have seen me fill out AAA settings, no DHCP, no DNS, no NTP, time. I could even add some other configuration values like stealth watch flow destination if I wanted to. The other information that comes from intent is the device credentials. So I have CLI credentials, SNMP, V3 credentials even, and then any HTTP credentials that I wanted to have based off the device type. The other thing that we want to take a look at is the image repository. So with the image repository, when I do onboarding, any device that is considered the golden image, I'm going to deploy some 9300s, and if those 9300s are not at a particular iOS version that I have set up, then they will be upgraded at the time of deployment during plug and play. So I'm not setting an image upgrade because that will make the deployment take a lot longer, but if I'm doing a big deployment, I of course want to select a golden image so that I am standardizing the iOS version for all my switches. So our network profiles, we'll create network profiles, and this is where we actually assign these templates to our sites. So I have a profile here called Lab Vic Switching. It's got 2 sites assigned to it. As you can see here, South Bank and the 4th floor. So that's where I will deploy these switches to. Inside these settings, I have an onboarding template, and I also have a day in template here. So this is saying for this device type, what type of template do I want to run? So we're going to go ahead and choose our new template that we created. Save that. And now when I assign a device I'm claiming to this site, that template is going to be applied. So I've plugged in my switches. They're out of the box. They're plugged into my network right now, and a few different ways to connect these devices or get them to find the DNA center. The one that we're using is DHCP. So there's some DHCP options that we have. The switch gets a DHCP address and automatically finds the DNA center. There are a few other ways of doing this. So coming into provision and plug and play, we're going to see our 2 switches that we've plugged in sitting there waiting to be claimed. They have no configuration on them at all except for the DHCP address that they received. So what I want to do here is take these serial numbers and then copy these and put these into my CSV file. So you can see I put those in my CSV file, and just remember any parameters that are required need a star next to them for this to work properly. So we're going to go ahead and claim these switches. I'm going to select a site, and that site is going to tell the switches what template to pull from. The next slide shows what image is going to be applied and what template will be applied to each switch. On this screen, this is where we fill out the variables to our template. So you can see all these variables here, and they need to be filled out. So what I'm going to do is import my template. I'm going to import the CSV file that we've populated. And then what I should see on each switch, I can see those values. On this screen, we can go ahead and review that day 0 configuration. So if I come in and say I want to look at the template CLI value, you can see what's actually going to be deployed to this particular switch. So what we'll go ahead and do is claim this switch. So what will happen is the switch will request this configuration from the DNA center, and that configuration will be pushed onto the switch along with any software upgrades that are required. The other thing we want to take a look at is on the Identity Services Engine. The switches have not been added to the Identity Services Engine, but through intent, we have told the switches that they need to be in Identity Services Engine. So we'll come back here after the plug and play is finished and see if these switches get added or if we need to do that manual. So once the devices have finished their claim process, they'll move from the unclaimed window to the provision window. I'll go to inventory and have a look at these devices. And what I'll notice is border 1 and border 2, the two devices I just did plug and play on, they don't have FQDNs. And this is just telling me that I haven't finished the provisioning process. I actually need to provision the site intent on these devices, which will contain the FQDN, the AAA settings, and a few other settings. So we're going to go ahead and finish the provisioning process by coming to provision and provision device. Now, I'm not applying any templates to this config, but you can see here what we're going to deploy on these switches is the NTP, AAA, DNS, DHCP, syslog, NetFlow collector, SNMP syslog, and also TrustSec integration. So we'll go ahead and deploy that. Now to have a look at what's happening with the provisioning, I'm going to switch my focus to provision. And I can see my border 1 and border 2, and I can see that border 1 is in the configuration process, border 2 is in the provisioning process or pending process. I can refresh this, get an update on where we're at. So I can see both border 1 and border 2 are successful. So the config, all that config has been pushed. And I have FQDNs now because that came from the site intent. That site intent also had the integration with Identity Services Engine. So let's jump over to the Identity Services Engine and see if our nodes have showed up. As you can see in here, I have my border nodes with radius configuration, TACAX configuration if you're using it, SNMP settings, and the TrustSec configuration. So this switch is fully ready to go to support TrustSec managed from ICE or the DNA Center. So you can see how easily it is to add new switches to the environment without ever touching the CLI of the switch. So thank you for watching this video on plug and play. If you would like to see more in-depth features of plug and play or even further workshop plug and play, please talk to your sales associate or visit us at datatree.com.